Hi, fourth grade. Welcome back. I hope you had a wonderful spring break as much as you could. Um, Mine was pretty uneventful. Well, I shouldn't say that. My husband had to go to the emergency room. He broke two of his fingers. Some wood fell on it. So that was kind of unexpected and a little scary, but he's fine. Everything's fine. But yeah, other than that, we just kind of hung out at home and we did go see there's a new baby bison that was born at Big Bone State Park down a little past Florence. So if you haven't gone to see the little baby bison, that was a fun activity. Got outside a little bit, went for a little hike. So if you're interested, if you need something to do, that could be something you do one night or one day over the weekend. So so today and tomorrow are going to be two more just introductory lessons and videos before we read our chapter book. We're going to start our chapter book on Wednesday, but there are some things that I still want you to be familiar with and to know about before we really jump into um, the Titanic. So these today and tomorrow, these are still lessons and they're good introductory lessons that I feel like they're important for you to understand. So you really get the full picture of what happens in our story that we will begin on Wednesday. So I just want to let you know that today's activity, if we were to do it in the classroom, I would have split it up into 2 days. And I didn't do that for this because I just left it as one um, lesson just so for video purposes and things like that. But if you need 2 days to do this, that's completely fine. Um, your parents have the materials that you will need for today's activity, and I'll go over that here in a little bit. But if you need 2 days to do it, that's fine. The introductory lesson that we're doing tomorrow, it will not take you very long. So try to get a good chunk of it finished today, but if you want to finish it up tomorrow, that's fine. This activity also has a homework assignment that I'm counting as a reading spiral grade. So I'll explain that also towards the end of the video. So make sure you pay attention to what you need to do for your homework. I guess, yeah, we'll still call it homework even though you're at home for everything. But, if you want to call it something else, that's fine. Reading spiral assignment, we'll call it that. So the materials that you will need for today's activity is your 5-subject notebook. You're going to be in the reading notes section, and you're going to need 3 pages for this activity. And I show you in a Google slide that I emailed to your parents, but you're going to label each page like this. So at the top, it's going to say first class, and then dining, food, entertainment, and then fun facts. And then you're going to do that same exact thing for second class, dining slash food, entertainment, fun facts. And I'll explain all this. You're probably like, what is this? What's happening? What are we doing? I will definitely explain that for you. I'm just letting you know what you'll need. Third class, dining, food, entertainment, fun facts. So 3 pages, same little topics, just different headings for each class of the Titanic. You probably know what you're going to be doing today. So you're going to need your 5-subject notebook. You're going to need the Google Slide PDF that I emailed to your parents. I emailed them a little link, and I just put a bunch of pictures and information together for you. I felt like getting it to you that way was just the easiest to do. If you want to just do it on your computer screen, that's fine. If you want to print it off, that's completely up to you and your parents. That's just something that you will need to look at somehow. And then you're also going to need, in your take-home packet, I gave you a little passenger card. It looks something like this. The picture will probably be different. You might have the same picture I did. But it looks something like this. I know it's small, so if you lost it or if you can't find it, shoot me an email. I can send you one really quick, no big deal. But you do need this because will be part of your reading spiral assignment that you will have. So try and find this. for the activity. And so what we're doing today is we are going to be discussing the people that were on board the Titanic. We're going to talk specifically about a few, but then groups and the three classes that were on the Titanic. You really can't discuss the Titanic without mentioning the three classes that there were. There was a first class, a second class, and a third class. So today you are going to get familiar with how different those three classes were. And they were they had things that were similar, but they were very, very different. And certain passengers on certain classes could do things that other classes couldn't. So this is just a way for you to kind of go through that experience of the three different classes. So one thing I want you to make sure you really focus on today is this passenger card. I want you to imagine that you are this person traveling. This was an actual person on the Titanic. So this lady right here, what's her name? Miss Margaret Fleming. Some of you might have her. She was an actual passenger on the Titanic. And I want you to pay attention closely to the class that they were in. So Miss Fleming, she was a first class passenger. It tells you right underneath their name. And it says here in parentheses that she was a servant. So she was probably a first class family's maid or traveling with a first class family to help them and do things for them. And then you will see some other things on there, just general information. But I want you to really act like you are that person. You'll get to see some ways that they were treated, some foods that they got to eat, some things that they got to do for fun. This is just kind of a way to make it a little more real for you. So you're not just taking notes on random things that aren't really important to you as a fourth grade student. So try to hone in that Titanic passenger person that you are for today. Okay, you will find out later on at the end of our little experience today if your person survived or if they did not survive. You'll find that out at the end if you are interested in that. So first, let's just talk about really quick the Titanic's purpose. And what it was. So as you know from our little KWL activity we did before spring break, I told you that it was a ship and it was very, very big. But why were people on it and what was its purpose? So one thing that I want you to know, and you probably didn't know this, but the Titanic's full name was the RMS Titanic. And RMS stood for Royal Mail Ship. So the Titanic was a mail ship that had thousands of pieces of mail that it was delivering to America. So it started boarding people in England on April 10th, 1912. So 108 years ago, when we were on spring break on April 10th, is when it first started. So it started in England, and then it stopped in France and in Ireland, and then it was going across the Atlantic Ocean, and it was going to stop in New York City. And I show you a little map in your Google Slides of where all that is, just so you can kind of get a good visual of where it is and where it sank and where it picked up people and things like that. So it was delivering mail from Europe to America, and it actually had a post office on board. So if you were a passenger and you wanted to mail a letter, you could drop it off in the Titanic's little post office and it would deliver it for you when you got to America. So I thought that was pretty cool. But it was also just a basic passenger ship. So there were about a little over 2,000 people on board. And it was made up of people in first, second, and third class. And it was pretty much taking people from Europe over to America for different purposes and for different reasons. And we'll get to that when we just kind of discuss your experience. Okay. So before you start your activity today, I want you to get familiar with 4 gentlemen that were on board the Titanic. And I personally like to call them the people in charge. So they were the people that if there was ever a problem on the Titanic, or if they had to make a decision, if something happened and things had to change, or decisions had to be made, these were the people that would do that. And in 1912, and really, I mean, even today, I call them the people in charge because they had a huge responsibility. Um, they were the go-to people. And if you think about, if you've ever been on a plane, or if you've ever been, maybe you've been on a cruise ship before, um, or even your school bus driver, or your teachers, your administrators, those are examples of people in charge. If there's ever a problem or an issue, and you kind of know who the go-to people are, the decision makers. And these 4 gentlemen really had a responsibility because they had to make sure that all 2,000 people on board the Titanic were safe before themselves. So I want you to make sure you understand who these people are. So the first person I want you to know, and these pictures and the explanations are in your Google slide, so you can read them a little closer. You probably can't look at it very well on my computer screen and in this video, but I just want to explain their roles on the Titanic and what they did. So first and foremost, I want you to meet our captain. Here he is. His name was Captain Edward John Smith. He went by E.J. Smith. I'm not related to him. I don't think. That would be really cool if I was. Here's a picture of him, and I'll let you read this in the Google slides. But he was the person in charge. So any decision, anything that happened, he was the person you went to. So if you were to think about our school, Mr. Stefan would be our captain. So anything that has to happen, any decisions, any problems that arise, he's kind of the go-to person and the final decision maker in everything that happens. Fun fact about Mr. Captain Smith, he did not survive the sinking of the Titanic, and this was probably going to his captain job on the Titanic was probably going to be his last captain job, and it was rumored that he was going to retire once the ship made it to New York. So unfortunately, he did not make it to his retirement. So the next man I want you to get familiar with, he is William Murdoch, and he was the first officer on the Titanic. So the first officer would kind of be Mrs. Guyman. It's kind of the assistant to the captain. So if the captain is asleep, if he wasn't feeling well, or if something happened to the captain, he would be the next go-to person in charge to make all the decisions that needed to be made. So the Titanic hit the iceberg late at night on April 14th, 1912. It happened right before midnight, and the captain had actually just gone to sleep. And so when he was asleep, Mr. Murdoch, Officer Murdoch here, he was the person who gave the commands of how the ship should try and go around the iceberg. So if you ever read about the Titanic, you'll notice that Captain Smith isn't mentioned at all during the collision of the iceberg because he was asleep. He had gone to bed for the night. So it was Officer Murdoch who actually gave all those decisions. So the next guy, his name is Thomas Andrews, and he is actually a character in our Titanic book that we are going to start reading. Excuse me. And he was the ship's designer, so the architect. So he pretty much made a blueprint and designed it, and he told everyone where the room should go, what it should look like. The Titanic was a very grand, luxurious, just really fancy ship. So he was kind of the mastermind behind all that. He was on board the Titanic. He did not survive either. And he was the Titanic was, it was on its first voyage. It had never been sailed before. So he was on board just to make sure everything was working well, all the passengers were happy. So he was a passenger on the Titanic as well. And I didn't tell you, Mr. Murdoch, he also did not survive the sinking of the Titanic. And the last person is Mr. Bruce Ismay. Here's a picture of him right here. And so Mr. Ismay, he is was a very rich man. He was the president of a company. So the Titanic was owned by a company called the White Star Line, and Mr. Bruce Ismay was the president of that company. So he was on board just like Mr. Andrews was, just to make sure that everything was going well, the passengers were happy. And these four gentlemen were in contact with each other throughout the sinking, or the sailing and the sinking of the ship. And Bruce Ismay is a very controversial character when you talk about the Titanic, because I consider him one of the people in charge. And when the Titanic hit the iceberg, and when these four people and the rest of the crew realized that this ship is not really unsinkable, that it is going to sink, that they pretty much had that responsibility they're not considered safe until all the passengers are off into a lifeboat and are safe. So that's why, the captain died, Mr. Murdoch died, Thomas Andrews died, because there were still passengers on board that had not reached safety. Bruce Ismay, however, he did get into a lifeboat, and he kind of saved himself when there were still other people and hundreds of people still on board. So he had a very controversial arrival when he made it to New York City. He did not have a very happy life after that, because people called him a coward, because he should have gone down with the ship just like every other person could have or should have, that was in charge. So he, you might have your opinions about how you feel about that, and which is fine, but he was when you talk about Bruce Ismay, a lot of people think that, he's a very controversial man. He didn't do what he was supposed to do. He was a coward, things like that. So those are the four people that I really want you just to get familiar with, because you will, when you study the Titanic and then we talk about it, we're going to mention these people and you're going to hear their names again. So I just want you to be familiar with them. So what you're doing in your notebook today is, like I said, you're going on a kind of like a field trip to the 3 classes. I just want you to get familiar with what it was like to be on each class. So you, in your Google slide PDF that I send out to your parents, you have menus and you have pictures of food and the dining room of each class. So one thing I want you to get familiar with was, what kind of food did people eat when they were on the Titanic, depending on what class they were in. I do want you to try to get familiar with some of the food. You might have to look some of it up, because I didn't know what some of it was when I first read some of the menus, especially in first class. I was like, what is this? Just to see if you think it's appetizing, or if you think it would be something that you would enjoy eating or not, because first class especially was very fancy. So I want you to get familiar with the food and just their dining experience. What do you think it was like? How would you describe it? The next thing is, what would you do for fun? So if you were a first class, second class, or third class passenger, what could you do on the Titanic that was kind of like your entertainment, your fun? But I do want you to remember that in 1912, fun was a lot different than it is in 2000, or what year are we in? 2020. My gosh. I've been in quarantine too long. I don't know what year it is. So in 1912, there was no internet. There weren't any movies or TV shows or video games. So what was fun in 1912, you might not consider it fun, but it just make sure, remember, you're a Titanic passenger today. So, uh, you know, you might not think playing checkers or playing cards or, you know, walking on the boat deck would be considered fun. But in 1912, that would be considered someone's entertainment when they were on such a big ship that they were. Okay, and then the last thing you're going to do is I do have just like little paragraphs about each class, and I want you to find out some fun facts, so interesting facts, anything that you think is interesting, something that maybe stands out to you for first, second, and third class. I'm just going to go through, I'm not going to walk through this with you because I feel like you can do this at your own pace. But here are some things I want you to know about each class before you dive into your little field trip you're going to go on today. So when you visit first class today, here's what I want you to keep in mind. First class, it was for the rich. It was for, you know, the famous people. In 1912, if you were rich and if you had a lot of money and if your family had a lot of money, that's pretty much who the famous people were of that day. Our famous people that we have today, they're movie stars and they're singers and athletes. They didn't have any of those celebrities in 1912. So your money was kind of your status, and a ticket on the Titanic for first class was very expensive. But if you could afford a first class ticket for yourself and or your whole family, then that was kind of your way to show off your money and to mingle with all the other rich and famous people. So it was definitely a social event for first class passengers. You'll get to read on your little field trip all the things that they got to do and things like that. So second class passengers, they were kind of in the middle of first and third class. So there were some very wealthy families, but then there were some poorer families. So first, second class was just kind of in the middle. You kind of had a little mix of all kinds of different social status and wealth in second class. Now, third class, that was made up mostly of immigrants. So I want you to think back to our Orphan of Ellis Island book that we read in the fall and when we studied immigrants. So a lot of people were moving to America to start their new life, just like a lot of immigrants were during this time. So they pretty much moved everything that they had in their old home and they boarded the Titanic, and then they were getting ready to move to America. But I think back to our third class experience, the steerage experience that Dominic, Francesco, and Antonio had when they were on board the New Amsterdam. Ooh, look at my memory. So we talked about how that experience in third class and in steerage was just disgusting, how people were crammed together. It was loud, it was noisy, things were dirty, it smelled, just kind of remember that experience. The third class experience on the Titanic was nothing like that, nothing. They still had their own room. They probably shared it with another family. It had indoor plumbing. I mean, that was something that people didn't have in their regular house. And to be on board the Titanic with indoor plumbing, that was amazing. You have to keep in mind, people didn't shower as much as they did here. So third class passengers might not have even used the shower when they were on board. So it was just kind of up to them. So their experience was just amazing. And it was not like any other experience on a ocean liner before. So I don't want you to think that the Orphan of Ellis Island third class experience is the same as third class passengers on the Titanic, because it was not even close to it. Complete opposite of everything. And then so think about your person, that your passenger that you're pretending to be today. So focus on their class. And one thing I want you to know is that when the Titanic hit the iceberg, first class women and children were allowed to get into the lifeboats first. So if you were first class man or in second or third class, you had to wait. So women and children first class could go on first. And then it kind of trickled down from there. And then second class, women and children were allowed to get into the lifeboats next. Well, what happened was the ship was sinking very, very quickly, and people thought it was unsinkable. So a lot of people didn't really go into the lifeboats, and it was close to midnight. So people were asleep and they didn't really understand why they were being called out of their rooms to go into lifeboats. And so a lot of the people that ended up dying the night that it sank were in third class because they didn't have a chance to get up to a lifeboat, unfortunately. Now, that does not mean that if you are a third class passenger today that you automatically died. I don't want you to think that, because there were third class people that did survive, that did make it to a lifeboat. And I don't want you to think that if you're a first class passenger, you were saved, because there were plenty of first class passengers that died. So I do want you to just kind of make a prediction of what you think happened to your person. Like I said, I'll tell you how you can look up your person here in a little bit. So here's your homework assignment, your reading spiral assignment for today. I want you to write 3 paragraphs for me. So after you go on your little class field trip, your Titanic class field trip, you are going to pick 2 classes to compare and contrast. So how are they the same and how are they different? I think the obvious choice, I think first class and third class are just so opposite. It would be easy to compare and contrast them, but you don't have to do that at all. So your first paragraph for your reading spiral assignment is going to be, how are they the same? Your second paragraph is going to be, how are they different? And then your third paragraph, I want you to write a paragraph about your passenger and what their name was, where were they from, what class were they in. And then after you research about them and figure out what happened to them, what's their life story? Did they survive? Did they unfortunately die the night that it sank? And a lot of your passengers have really interesting stories. So when you research them, read about their life and about their experience on the Titanic, because some of you have just really cool stories. Not everyone does. Most of you just have regular passengers, and it will tell you where they were from, what their job was, whether they lived or they survived, or they lived or they died or not. So you can, I would prefer if you just typed out your 3 paragraphs into an email and email them to me. But if you would rather write them in your notebook, that's fine too. Just make sure you take a picture of it and email it to me. I would like them by Wednesday of this week. Like I said, if you need another day to do it, if you need to email it to me by Thursday, that's fine too. I'm going to try to just kind of check and see whose I have and whose I don't by Friday. So I just don't want you to get really far behind, because we're going to start reading our book on Wednesday. So I want you to kind of have all of our introductory activity assignments completed by then. Okay, so last thing, I know this is a long video, so we're towards the end now. Your Titanic passenger, here's the easiest way to look them up. So their first and last name on your passenger card, type that into Google. So I would type in, you don't need to put Miss or Mr. Or Mrs. That's fine. Just put their first and last name. So I would put Margaret Fleming. Then after that Google search, I would put Titanic passenger, because there might be a lot of Margaret Flemings out there in the world, and we want Google to pick the specific one. So Margaret Fleming, Titanic passenger, and then it will take you to the first link, and then that's where you will read about them. I did give your parents the actual website where I got all this passenger information. It's like titanicencyclopedia.org, I think. I'm not sure if that's the exact website or not, but your parents have it, and it's in the Google Slides PDF also. I personally do not think that website is very user-friendly. You have to click a lot of different things, and it's just not a very easy search website. to find your passenger. So I think if you want to do it that way, that's fine, but I just think it's easier to do first, last name, Titanic passenger, search, go to the first link that you see after you search. Okay, I think that's it for today. That was a long video. So like I said, if you're kind of done for right now, you want to take a break, that's fine. Try to go through at least your first, second class today. Go through all of them if you want to. If you need to do a little bit tomorrow, that's fine too. So I hope you enjoy your little class field trip that you're going to go on. And I hope you enjoy learning about this passenger that was on the Titanic. And I look forward to reading your reading spiral assignments that I get later on this week. So if you have a question, comment on this video, or you can send me an email, and I will see you all tomorrow with another activity. So hope you all are well, hope you staying healthy, and you're not going too stir crazy, not too incredibly bored at home. I hope to see your faces in person very soon. So I miss you all. I will see you soon. Bye.